Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back. There will be spoilers on all things Twin Peaks in this video, and there will also be one potential Mulholland Drive spoiler. So viewers, please be warned. Today I want to talk about what Laura whispered to Cooper in Part 2. Prior to the airing of Part 5, I speculated that whatever Laura whispered to Cooper was the key to everything, and I still believe this to be true. Unfortunately, I still have no idea whatsoever what she whispered. You will recall, of course, that this wasn't the first time we saw Laura whisper to Cooper. This was familiar territory, as we had seen this exact same type of thing way back in what was initially long known as the second episode of the original Twin Peaks, back before they ever started numbering the pilot. We know now what she whispered that time, but initially, Cooper didn't remember what she whispered, and I don't think he was ever supposed to. Network coercion forced Lynch and Frost to reveal the killer prematurely, and creative control was effectively seized from the creators. Lynch and Frost have long maintained they knew Leland was the killer early on in the process. So Lynch knew who the killer was, and Lynch knew what Laura whispered, but Cooper didn't remember. And ultimately, we as an audience were never really supposed to find out. Who killed Laura Palmer? That mystery was the driving life force of the series. David Lynch has always had a great understanding of audience expectations, and he has always excelled when it comes to manipulating an audience's expectations. That, in part, to me, is one of the reasons Lynch is such a talented filmmaker. Because after all of these years, even though longtime Lynch fans are well aware of his abilities to manipulate, he still manages to effectively manipulate our expectations on a multitude of levels. A textbook example of this happens in Mulholland Drive, when Betty is rehearsing her lines with Rita for an upcoming audition. The way that Betty and Rita play out the scene, it sets up a certain type of mood. But then when Betty has her actual audition, the same scene plays out in an entirely different way, with a heightened sense of intensity, strongly contrasting with the initial setup. In the new Twin Peaks, I thought Lynch took this manipulation of expectations to staggering new heights. For starters, the central mystery itself. In the original, it was easy to understand and abundantly apparent right from the start. Who killed Laura Palmer? But in the return, the central mystery is far more abstract and much more difficult to clearly define. And then we have the central locations. It was natural to expect going in that the locations would be centered around the locations we were familiar with from Twin Peaks. And at times this was true, but right from the very beginning, a good deal of the new story unfolded in New York City, and Las Vegas, and Buckhorn, South Dakota. Then we have FBI Special Agent Dale Cooper himself. The Agent Cooper we had all grown to know is almost always in control, and in the heat of the moment, Cooper almost always seemed to understand exactly what was happening. But in the return, Cooper was almost never in control, and he never seemed to understand much of anything that was going on. This was a big one here, as Lynch took a well-known beloved character and turned him completely on his head. Coop still had a big heart, an ability to detect liars, quick reflexes with terrific fighting instincts, a sense of duty and patriotism, and of course, a fondness for hot black coffee and cherry pie. But all the same, he still wasn't quite Cooper, even if he kinda was in the purest sense. Only briefly in parts 16 and 17 did he come across as the Coop we had long known and loved. This inherently limited the type of camaraderie we saw between Coop and other characters. Cooper had admirably bonded with so many interesting and decent characters in the original run, but this time around, we only got one moment like that, and it was between Cooper and battling Bud Mullins. This scene was reminiscent of that sense of camaraderie from the original, but it was sort of like a distant echo. We also have the fact that this time around, Cooper never really understood the importance of the Giant's clues. In the original Twin Peaks, all of the Giant's clues were things that could be understood. But in the return, Cooper never seemed to understand the importance of anything the Giant said to him, bar driving 430 miles. And the very first scene we saw in the return, it involved Cooper and the Giant in a way where we were led to expect that these clues would have a tangible resolution. And that never really happened. Coffee was still used in the capacity of comic relief, but it was done so in a much different way. It was different, but yet it often served the same type of purpose. Then within the story itself, we had the entire misdirection thing going on with the Mitchum brothers, where initially they seemed hell-bent on destroying Cooper over the sins of Douglas Jones, but the next thing you know, the Mitchum brothers wound up absolutely loving Cooper. And collectively, many of us experienced a similar defiance of expectations when we suddenly found ourselves inexplicably rooting for Mr. C during the immediate lead-up to his showdown with Renzo. And on that note, Bad Coop getting gunned down by Ray was entirely unexpected, not to mention each and everything that transpired after that, from the emergence of the woodsman to the nuclear blast, and everything else that happened in the powerhouse that was Part 8. Then we have a slew of different dialogues that occurred throughout the return that taken alone seem totally random, and taken together, they all seem to have a sense of a coherent theme where everything is sort of interconnected, but connected in such a way that is mesmerizing and difficult to discern. But the meaning of these dialogues almost seems to add layers to the abstract of the overall mystery. Wally Brando paying his respects to Truman. Candy's words right after she took an unusually long time escorting Tony to the Mitchum brothers. The log lady helping to guide Hawk with her insight. Many of the interactions between Audrey and Charlie. Dr. Jacoby encouraging his listeners to shovel their way out. And then many different seemingly random yet connected scenes that unfolded at the Roadhouse. All of these things seem so random at times, but then taken together, they sort of make some sense. Or do they? Is Lynch just playing with our expectations while exploring the world through his art? In a sense, Twin Peaks: The Return almost seems to serve as an exercise that once the genie's out of the bottle, you can never truly put him back. You can never get the old gang back. And even if you could, after so much time, it's never the same. Times change, people change, and circumstances change. Lynch's trouble with television is very well documented. The networks first forced his hand with Twin Peaks, and that closed down Laura's central mystery, which effectively let the genie out of the bottle. Then they screwed around with the time slots on Twin Peaks, and by the time Lynch had rewrited the ship and forged a new central mystery, they canceled the show. When Lynch returned to the world of Twin Peaks and Fire Walk with Me, the first thing we see is old Leland smashing a television set. If Lynch were Diane in that moment, it should be fairly easy to imagine what he might have been saying. Then Lynch had his troubles with Mulholland Drive, which was inexplicably passed on for the chance of becoming a series. Fortunately, Lynch was still able to parlay Mulholland Drive into a superb feature film, and he did so very cleverly. And then even with Twin Peaks: The Return, Lynch nearly bailed on the project. But again, fortunately, Showtime ultimately gave him what he needed to maintain creative control. And that scene with Norma optioning out of her franchise contract, that certainly acts as a fitting tribute to that final obstacle Lynch faced prior to The Return becoming a reality as we now know it. So with regards to Lynch manipulating the audience, right up until the final moments, I can't imagine anyone would have been able to predict what was about to happen. In his defining moment, FBI Special Agent Dale Cooper didn't seem to understand what was happening. Coop looked absolutely baffled. The Giant's clues seemingly proved worthless. Hearing Laura's scream was horrifying, but the look on Cooper's face was equally terrifying and disturbing. And the very last thing we see after Cooper's complete state of confusion and failure is we see what I believe is him trying to remember what Laura whispered to him. So what did Laura whisper to Cooper? Who knows? But whatever it was, I'm getting the impression that Cooper still doesn't remember either. So not only did Cooper forget the Giant's clues in his defining moment, but he also seems to have forgotten the importance of what Laura whispered to him as well. This, again, is something that was familiar territory. Cooper, after having his initial dream about Laura in the original run, he remembered nearly every detail about his dream, except the most important aspect. He even remembered that Laura actually whispered the killer's name to him. He just couldn't remember what the name was. But David Lynch knew who it was, and he never really wanted us to know. So I believe the true meaning behind what Laura whispered to Cooper is exactly that. Cooper doesn't remember. We as an audience don't know, but Lynch knows. And whatever Laura whispered, I still maintain it probably helps better understand the central mystery in The Return. If and when we get a season 4, and maybe a season 5 and a season 6, I don't imagine Lynch will ever tell us what Laura whispered. He may lead us closer to the mark, he may lead us farther away, he may oscillate between the extremes. But that, I think, is the real meaning behind what Laura whispered to Cooper in The Return. Lynch never really wanted Laura's mystery resolved. And now, when all is said and done, Lynch has managed to put Laura's mystery, the genie itself, back in the bottle. Powerhouse. I still remain hopeful that we may yet get a season 4. I believe the fact that we still have one missing diary page, and the fact that Cole will remember the unofficial version of events, I think these are tells that it's at least something where Lynch had some ideas, and he wanted to keep the door open. And hell, for what it's worth, on Showtime Anytime, they have Twin Peaks: The Return listed as, quote, Season 1, not just as a limited series. So I think Season 4 could be in the cards, but either way, I'll always be itching for more, and no amount of scratching will ever suffice, because I'm just itching. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you enjoyed. Have a wonderful night.